definitely did this as like a buddy read, which was really fun. And I think that made this even more enjoyable. So if you haven't read this, I know we're about to like give all the spoilers, but I swear, if you haven't read this or you want to read it again, and I suggest having another friend who's never read it read it with you, because this was so fun. So Kit gets pissed off and she runs upstairs to get this typewriter, but meanwhile she'd taken a nap. So they're at this funeral and I'm like, what the fuck, girl? They're gonna come back from the funeral. Yeah. How long is this funeral?
Then Kit like literally
he's an idiot.
Takes off and tackles them. I'm like,
yeah,
what? But you know, I mean, I'm 31 too, and I'm not chasing no 20-year-olds down the street. Like, what are you doing? Like, I'm sorry. What?
Yeah.
That's how. What?
Her dad.
Her own
Kit's dad. What? I wasn't ready. Welcome, Night Owls, to the Book Club After Dark podcast, an inviting moonlit podcast. I'm your host, Danny.
And I'm Michelle. We break down fantasy, romantasy, and thriller novels.
All things enchanting, intriguing, suspenseful, and maybe a little spicy.
Each episode features intimate discussions on captivating stories, character breakdowns, fan theories, and more. And this is your content warning. This podcast contains mature themes and discussions that may not be suitable for all audiences. Episodes include explicit language and descriptions of mature romance, as well as depiction of violence and other intense subject matter. This podcast is rated R for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
And going forward from here, there are going to be lots of spoilers tonight for our thriller episode, which I'm super pumped for. We are covering The Only One Left by Riley Sager. So we're very excited to do this. But of course, to go through the whole thing, there are going to be tons and tons of spoilers. This is your spoiler warning.
Let's get cozy because the best stories are told after dark.
So tonight's drink of the episode is a fun one. The ingredients are kind of a play on like where we are and what's going on and character related, but it's also going to be titled The Hope's End. It features bourbon whiskey, elderflower liqueur, and grapefruit bitters. You're going to garnish it with an orange peel. And naturally, we had two characters, Carter and Kit, who drink whiskey in the book. The drink itself is actually an elderflower old-fashioned. We're talking about something that happened in 1929. The drink Old Fashioned was extremely popular at this time, but it was also representative of the folks that we're dealing with in the 80s and in 1929 throughout this book. So that's our drink.
Yeah, I love an Old Fashioned. Obviously, can't have one right now, but I love a good Old Fashioned, and just it's iconic of the 1920s when you picture like the Roaring 20s, and we're in this book getting into the end of the Roaring 20s, actually, when we do our flashbacks.
Peak.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's very iconic of this time.
Yeah. So I love this one. Great going down. We will show you how to make one in our drink of the episode. I will be showing you how to make this elderflower old fashioned. So I'm pretty excited about that. I haven't got to make a drink of the episode for a minute. So we'll have the Hope's End coming at you on our socials. So keep an eye out for that. We are going to immerse ourselves now into Maine. So peak New England, peak Northeast part of the country, to a place and location. The home itself is called Hope's End. The town itself doesn't really get a title, but it's just known as the outskirts town. So I'm thinking a very small coastal town, very low population. And this is where our story begins. And this is where we're going to find ourselves. So while you're getting cozy, listening in, immerse yourself in this idea that we are on coastal Maine, and we are talking this book, The Only One Left. We can even see on the cover of the book where we are from a cliffside perspective. Yeah. So if you're here for the book talk or you're reading along with us, we are glad that you're here.
All right, let's get into the setting. So like Danny said, we have two different settings going on here, but primarily the same location in a way. So we have a Maine coastal town. You get a really big hint that the cliffside is more of upper class, whereas like in the town is more like working class. There's a clear class divide in a lot of the conversations and speaking about money. So the actual location of the mansion that the majority of the story takes place is called Hope's End. And it's literally on a cliffside in coastal Maine. And Winston Hope, for building it like this, is such an asshole because erosion. But anyways, so literally
not for him. He's an elitist. That's not going to happen.
Of
course,
course
he built it in
not.
1929. So he's like, nothing can happen to me. That's not going to
No. And
happen here.
that's a big telling of that era in 1929, and that's our second setting, really. That's our secondary setting. So our first time period, so present day for the book, is 1983, and then the key flashbacks are 1929. So a lot of flashbacks are just leading up to that Black Tuesday when the stock market crashed. So it's really
Yes.
peak roaring 20s. If you've ever seen the movie Great Gatsby, just picture that the entire time.
Yep, that's right.
And so when we're in 1983, we are looking at the mansion in a different lens. In 1983, we have this mansion, and when you're looking at it, it looks like it was once a great place. It was grand. There's marble. However, it's crumbling now. It's on this cliffside, and this is where the infamous Hope family murders take place in 1929. So you're introduced to this idea that this is like a haunted mansion, essentially.
When you first read that, Michelle, that it's like a haunted mansion, because I love thrillers so much, I was like giggly. My feet are like kicking my feet. I'm like, ooh, this is where the murders are.
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about me, but I was like excited.
I love a good haunted mansion story. I love this comes with a rhyme that comes with it too. That's very like Lizzie Borden, you know, the classics in terms of horror. And I just love
very
that.
classic horror. Yeah.
So no, I was definitely like, ooh, yay, murder mystery house. Who done it? And you know, we
How'd
love
they die?
solving it.
Yeah.
So in very stereotypical haunted mansion way, dark hallways, like portraits that like are the eyes shifting when I'm looking at them because it's so
giving
like
The Shining.
Yeah. There are locked rooms. There's, you know, there's like just the atmosphere is decaying too. And then even though there's a cleaner, it still looks like it's decaying because everything's old. Everything is basically frozen in time in 1929.
Yeah, they haven't updated anything. And then you have things that can't be frozen in time, such as erosion, which you talked about right at the beginning. And what's happening is the house is literally slanted as you go up the stairs. And the way that I thought about how this would be visually incredible to see on film, because that's where my mind always goes with thrillers, because sometimes you read a thriller and you're like, you wouldn't do this very well in film. Like it wouldn't look good. In certain thrillers that you read, they are perfect on page, but then if they tried to do it as a book or a book to film, they might not be super successful because of different elements of the story. Right. This book would be a fantastic film.
Right.
It would be incredibly visually. I loved the slant of the floors, how descriptive that was, where the shadows are as we're going through this. Like the way I could like hear, you know, Alfred Hitchcock-esque music as if that would be present, you know. It was also just something that I was like, damn, this would be really cool if Netflix picked this up, because I think they do a really good job with that, because they did. There's a couple other horror series that they've done a really phenomenal job with. And I was like, this would make a great short series, like couple episodes, like broken out versus a full film. I think it would be more exciting if they did the full details and broke it into like 5-6 episodes. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree on that because the way Riley Sager writes this book is the chapters end in cliffhangers. So doing episodes would add to that thriller anticipation element here. And in terms of, I feel like really phenomenal thriller books incorporate the setting as part of the horror. And he does that here. There's the question of when is going to happen, like the suspense of, is the house gonna fall at any moment in time? So it's not just like the murders, which is a big focus, but it's also the setting and the surroundings, and then all the little details that go into it. So
the paintings. I mean, so many little details and nuances that you don't realize are things until they're things.
Then we have our flashback setting, which is in 1929. And here, this is the height of the Hope family's wealth and social prominence. And it's kind of slightly on a downturn, which you're figuring out throughout the book. But the mansion is vibrant, full of life. This is before the infamous murders. There's staff. It's supposed to be like peak time for them. But events from this era are revealed through Lenora's typed account. So this is where we're getting the flashback element. So Lenora, who is one of our main protagonists here, which is kind of like an antagonist, but not really. So like there's that fun little switch. There's a protagonist, but she's an antagonist.
We don't know.
Yeah, the entire time. Are you good or are you bad? Did you murder your family or did you not? And it adds like the mystery and haunting and the horror to it. But it's really neat that even in 1929, you still get the elements of horror in the setting, because even though on the outside it looks like a great place to live, and that's what Winston Hope was, the father, was supposed or trying to show with all of his like flashy wealth, because he's new money, which is in the 1920s. The term new money was used a lot because there are people who just started investing and they got rich really, really quickly. Whereas opposed to Evangeline, her family comes from old money. So very like generational wealth essentially there. So there's the two different classes.
The dichotomy,
in terms of it,
between them.
So, but even in the home at its peak, it still felt trapped. That feeling of claustrophobia was still there, and isolation was still there. So there's still like that thriller horror sense, even with like the picturesque scene as well.
Yeah. And there's still this element of suspense weaved into the time period that it starts in 1929. So let's get into the characters now. We're going to introduce our characters. And of course, the way we structure our thriller episodes is different than our deep dives, because we really only do one episode for the entire book. So we kind of structure and break it out a little bit differently. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the characters, and we'll get more into the book itself here in a moment and the story elements. So our characters. So let's set it up. We have Kit McDear, who is our first female main protagonist. We'll go with that. She's our narrator. I would say she's a semi-reliable narrator. We can't really trust her, even at the beginning of the book. There's already like setting up of, is she a reliable narrator? I personally loved this about the book because it makes you feel the whole time like you're just on the edge of your seat of like, is this true? Is this true? Like you can't figure out where things line up, because Kit has a secret and she doesn't tell us about it right away. So her occupation is a home health aide, and she's currently on work probation. And we don't at the beginning have the full understanding of why this is, but we know that she was ultimately, throughout the story, we figure out in the very beginning, you find out that she was accused of assisting in a patient's death. What we don't know at the first part is that it's her mother's death. And so she was never convicted of this. It was like a huge deal. I mean, she went down to the station, detectives, interrogating her on it, like not a minor thing, a big fucking deal. And she gets suspended for 6 months. We find out that her boss basically despises her and wants to let her go. But because everything was dropped, he can't. So she ends up getting assigned to care for Lenora Hope at Hope's End. And so from the start, she's like, okay, this might be like a good fresh start for me. She's kind of ironically hopeful about the experience that she's about to have at Hope's End, even though Lenora Hope has this song about her. She knows about the murders. The whole town knows about the murders, but she's emotionally guarded. She has a lot of guilt and trauma from her mother's cancer and the ultimate fallout of what happened there.
Next, we have Lenora Hope, or who we believe is Lenora Hope. So she is the alleged family murderer, and she's the elderly stroke patient that Kit is taking care of. So background, she was accused of murdering her family in 1929. When she was 17 years old, there was a horrific murder there. Father, mother, and sister were killed. We'll get into the rhyme once we actually go into the plot. And then she also is paralyzed, partially, mostly, and mute due to strokes that she had. And the only way she can communicate is by either tapping twice for yes, once
with
for
her
no,
finger, yeah.
or using a typewriter, and in a very small portion of the book, a Ouija board. So so that's her background. And then we get the twist from her story. So there's a big twist at the end, and as we were reading it, we were texting back and forth and we were guessing it like together, like she is not who she says she is.
Yeah. And we definitely did this as like a buddy read, which was really fun. And I think that made this even more enjoyable. So if you haven't read this, I know we're about to like give all the spoilers, but I swear, if you haven't read this or you want to read it again, and I suggest having another friend who's never read it read it with you, because this was so fun. Just like talking about where we thought it was going to go. And we typically do that with our thrillers because I think for us, it makes it a lot more of an enjoyable experience to kind of go on the ride with someone else. You know, you're taking the journey together and trying to figure out what's happening. And the way that we had ideas, but we didn't guess it in full, not even
No.
close, of what was going to go down, which to me makes it an even higher
Better.
rating.
And the significance of her character deals a lot with identity and the plot twist and who she actually is throughout the book, because identity is, especially a woman's identity, is not something that was held sacred in the 1920s at all, 1980s. And a lot of the story is her battling with who she is versus what she's told she is versus what society believes she is. And so there's that whole concept of like battling with your identity. There's guilt, obviously, for things done in the past, and then survival, being, you know, someone who survives an atrocity like family murders. So her silence masks decades of deception, ultimately.
Yeah. And then speaking of deception, we have Mrs. Baker, who plays the housekeeper at Hope's End when we're first introduced to her. She is very stern, seemingly controlling, very protective of Lenora, and she's very secretive. We do not know much about her. She's very short, to the point, no nonsense. And we'll talk more about her twist, but her deception also spans decades. She is one of the central elements to our major plot twist in this story. And her plot twist and just who she is as a person, it definitely threw me for a loop to a certain extent. I had some ideas, but the full extent of what went on, I did not predict. Yeah, she's something else. Let's just say that.
Agreed. And that leads us to Jessie. So her role is a teen housemaid. She's kind of fun and bubbly and goofy a little bit. She wears like dangly bracelets. And so she definitely contrasts the setting and basically everyone else that works at Hope's End. So she's young, sassy. She's very suspicious of Kit, of what's going on, because Kit starts diving into the murders pretty quickly and like trying to like solve a case.
day
And she's
two.
like, you know, I was just joking, relax. But she's very observant. She also has a twist, which we'll save for the end as well. So there are a lot of characters in here that have different twists, which I do like. There's not just one major plot twist. There's like one twist and then another and then another, and then it's like the end, and then there's another. I'm like, oh my God, it doesn't end.
And the way I messaged you, Michelle, and I was like, where does Jessie fit into this? Because she was such a random character. And I was just like, sometimes when a thriller is not written super, super well like this was, there isn't a tie out. Like there's always like a funny character or like a character that like is quirky in sorts of ways or whatever. And kind of Jessie was that character here. But the way that Riley Sager ties these bows at the end is nuts. And I was just waiting to figure out Jessie's relevance, because she kind of just seemed like this housekeeper there, which they desperately needed at the house. So that alone would have been justification to have her there and like, you know, have her flee towards the end or whatever things, you know, shit hits the fan. And honestly, but that didn't happen. And it just, it made the book even better for me.
I agree. And you mentioned that there's a nice tie at the end. And I feel like basically every character gets a nice tie in at the end on their importance. So we don't have like random side characters that are like just meant to die off for no reason or just meant to be funny, or they're like, you know, they come in for one scene. Every character served its purpose, even like the flashback characters that we reference.
Yep. Which is nuts to be able to tie all those bows together. And let's talk about Mary. So Mary Milton is the former nurse before Kit, because obviously Lenora had a former nurse for her, and nurse's aide, I should say, because they don't call themselves nurses. So she had a caretaker.
Well, Mary was a nurse. Mary was a registered nurse.
That's true. That's right. And she mysteriously disappears before Kit arrives. And they're like, oh, she just left in the middle of the night. Like, we don't know what happened to her. She just left in the middle of the night. And the fate of her starts to unravel, like, oddly. And I remember writing this text to you, like, fairly early on about Mary. because when Kit goes into her room and she's like, why is her medical bag still here?
Mhm.
Why are all her clothes still here? That was already to me like a super major flag that there's
Day
something
one.
really dark going on here
Mhm.
and something sinister going on here. Yeah. And the fact that Kit doesn't piece this together right away was probably like one of my only irritating things about her was I was like, girl, like, what are we doing? And there was like one other key moment when we go into plot of like another time I text you and I was like, girl, what is Kit doing? You
Yeah.
know? But even still, like, I don't think it would have changed how it drove the plot. It just was me being like extra scrutiny over that character. But
Mhm.
Kit, like, kind of shoves aside. She's like, oh, well, she left in a hurry. Maybe she had a family emergency and she just like didn't grab all her stuff and she just found out she needed to get somewhere quickly. And you have to think this is in the 80s. This is pre internet, pre cell phone, all of that. And
Mhm.
so the idea that you don't know when someone comes back is not that crazy of a
Mm-mm.
thing as it would be now, where you can like check where someone went so much faster and there's like a lot more. The story just doesn't work in our time period for
Mhm.
those several of those reasons, but it works in this time period very, very well. And it came together very well. But
I
that's
agree.
Mary.
So then we have Archie. So Archie's a unique character because we get him both in present and past. Archie is
Hmm.
the chef that is currently working in 1983 as the chef, and then he worked in 1929 as kind of like a starting chef because he was like 16, 17 at the time. So he was still really young. So he was just working in the kitchen. But he is a best friend to Lenora as when they were kids. They grew up together and then he continued to stay. So he's very loyal to Lenora, our main character, and has shown like support for her throughout the age, even to the point where her sisters like there's like a love connection between you two, and Lenora just like kind of laughs at her like, no, there's no, that's like, my platonic best friend. So
Hmm. And then you have Evangeline Hope, who is Lenora and Virginia's mother. And she is beautiful. She's from Old Money. She marries Winston Hope, but we find out that she was forced into this marriage because she was pregnant and had an out of wedlock pregnancy. So we
mhm,
know from the 20s, especially the earlier 20s too, and just that in that time frame in general, not being a virgin and being pregnant out of wedlock,
mhm.
especially in high society, no,
Nope.
not okay, not acceptable. She was not able to marry who she wanted to, who is actually the hired help. That was not gonna fly. That was never gonna work out. So ends up getting an offer from Winston and it's done. Like she has to marry him. So she never actually loves her husband. And ultimately, she gets prescribed by her doctor something to cope with stress. And she basically gets addicted to painkillers and uses this to cope and ends up wasting away most of her time in her room, which is a wild thing to think about and absolutely a tragic story for Evangeline Hope.
Agreed. Her storyline was very tragic. Then we have Winston Hope, who I would say is probably our main villain, even though he's not
Yeah,
the
not a good
murderer.
dude.
But I don't he's the main villain.
He's not the murderer.
So
No.
no.
Hmm.
So he's one of the ones that died, and he's Lenora and Virginia's father. He comes from New Money, and he was cold, cruel. He only cared about material objects. He basically built this house on the cliff, like you pointed out, to show off that he has money because he didn't come from money. Seeing his wife in the state that she is, he essentially decided, well, I'm just going to sleep with the help instead of doing something better. And he has his
Yeah.
own business, which he doesn't do well with. And it comes to the point where Lenora's mother, Evangeline, mentions, like, you are not touching our daughter's money. And Evangeline's parents did not trust him at all because he was so quick to, like, jump on a deal. Like, hey, I will be bribed to marry your daughter. He's just filthy all around. We don't like him.
No, he's no. But is he characteristic of the time? Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
I think he fits 1929. I think he fits New Money. I think he's very stereotypically almost the classic, you know, male POS. He's just generally not a good person.
Mhm.
So we have Ricardo Mayhew, who is our next character. He is the groundskeeper in the 1929 flashbacks, who we keep hearing about and trying to figure out what his relevance is. He is initially perceived as the lover of Lenora and father of her child. And he's also married to Bernice Mayhew, who is a maid at Hope's End. So we have some not good thing going on here, definitely some cheating. And he has a twist too where he ties in to the story.
The way his storyline fits is so uniquely
Wild.
written because the way Lenora can communicate is through typing, and how Kit asks her questions is, and the answer she get is solely based on like what she types. And if she like uses nicknames, if she leaves out information, then Kit tries to fill in the gaps with the little information she
Herself.
has. So we
Mhm.
have this whole character and we think he's one thing, and then at the very end you're like, oh shit. And then, you know, obviously to do this episode, I also did like a skim reread, and then I'm like, oh my God, like I was perceiving this one way because Riley Sager wanted me to perceive this one way. But going back, I'm like, it was right there in front of you.
There.
And that's like with multiple twists. You're like, he tricked me ultimately.
Yeah.
So very well written, these twists and these characters. And that leads us to Carter, who is our current 1983 groundskeeper. And he was a former bartender who came to work at Hope's End to discover if he's the long lost grandson of Lenora Hope. So he ties in because he knew the groundskeeper before him, and the former groundskeeper before him kind of gave him a story of that would make him think that maybe I am the grandson of Lenora Hope. So he kind of came there searching for answers.
Then we have Patrick McDear, who is Kit's father, and he is very distant from the jump. And we think it's related to the death of his wife and the death of Kit's mother ultimately, and that there's a disassociation because of what happened there. His plot twist was fucking nuts, and I
was
did not see that
wild.
at
Nope.
all. I was not ready for that. It was a first for me where I was completely blindsided. Yeah. In a thriller. I was not ready for his twist at all.
I agree, because he wasn't very present in the novel at all, except for like kind of like a nagging voice in the back of Kit's mind, or
Yeah.
a reassuring voice ultimately, but he wasn't very present. So I agree, his plot twist came out of like left field for sure. And then we have Mr. Gerlin, which we've talked about a little bit. He is Kit's boss, also cold, distant man. The men in this book are not portrayed very well, except Archie.
No, for Archie, yeah.
Yeah. So he runs the company
Also
that
of the
Kit works
times.
for. Very true. So he runs the company that Kit works for, and he is upset with Kit for tarnishing the agency's name. So he's essentially making her pay for it based on her actions or her perceived actions.
Yeah. And that's why he's sending her to Hope's End.
Mhm.
Then we have Detective Vick, who's the town's only police detective. He is very skeptical of everything Kit says because he believes Kit murdered her own mom. So there's definitely some weirdness to him and his role, and the interactions between Kit and him also lead to the detective not understanding what's going on at Pope's End and also having a disbelief in Kit as she's telling him this story. And also give him, because he used to work at Hope's End in 1929, gives him like kind of he uses too many assumptions because of this.
Right.
And he's not a great detective because of how close he is to what he's trying to work on. So he allows loose ends and question marks to not be answered. And I don't think he's a great detective. That's my opinion of him. So, structure of the story, which we talked about a little bit, it starts in present day with Kit in 1983. She's our main protagonist that we're following, and we're flashing back multiple times to 1929 with typed letters that Lenora writes to Mary and also to Kit while the story goes on. And what I really liked, especially because there's certain ones between Lenora writing them to Mary and the timeline of where these are inserted, helps move the story along in a way that Kit isn't seeing. And so it's just a different way to line all that up, and I thought that that was very clever. I also really liked that the type, like the font between, like there was a true typewriter font for
Hmm.
Lenora's letters, and that was really cool. They had it on Kindle, and they also had it in the physical book as well, but I really enjoyed that, so that was great.
Yeah, I did too. So let's get into a little bit of themes. So for the themes that we're seeing in this book, we have truth versus perception. Basically, perception is a very iconic thing that's happening here. People perceived Lenora to be a murderer. People perceive Kit to be a murderer. There's the perceived notion of like the mansion's haunted. So there's perception, and honestly, it's digging deeper into like what's actually behind that outer layer. And then there's a lot of legends becoming, or stories becoming legends, and how rumors really just obscure reality here. And I love that little detail and those little aspects, because we have literally a murder that happened in 1929, and still, almost 60 years later, there's like a nursery rhyme that talks about it, that the kids in the local town chant like whenever they see the
Mhm,
house or just to themselves on the playground. It's really cool what he does with
mhm,
the identity of, or the idea of, legends.
mhm. Speaking of stories becoming legends and kind of talking about characters and where this is relevant, we didn't zone in on Kenny, but he's like a very small side character that Kit's initially sleeping with. And Riley Sager, of course, still ties him in as a central element to the plot because he ultimately basically shows Kit that, like, you are so smart that sometimes you miss really small details that I pick up on, and he's a lot younger than Kit. And so he is messing around and, like, trespassing on the property and running around and talking about stories or legends, daring each other to, like, and he's super
Hmm.
young compared to Kit. She's 31 and so they have, like, almost a decade in between them. And the twist, a revolving identity and where truth and perception lie. This is key to any thriller, but it's very much highlighted here in this book. There's just so many different ways that this all ties together. Then we have isolation and confinement. This works really well for thrillers too. This feeling of not being able to leave, this feeling of the physical setting of Hope's End is just like quite literally physically decaying. And there's the imprisonment emotionally and psychologically of some of these characters, which is basically everyone that's still stuck at Hope's End.
Hmm.
We have Lenora is trapped in her own body inside the house. Kit is physically mobile, like she can go wherever she wants, but she cannot leave Hope's End either because she has so much grief and shame and distress after being blamed for her mother's death, which has basically ultimately led to the fact that she can't get another job. Nobody else will hire her. She couldn't get a job to flip burgers, like nothing.
Hmm.
Nobody in town will hire her. She was on the front page. They know who she is and they know what she did because of the court of public opinion in the newspaper. And so therefore she can't get a job anywhere. And her last hope is Hope's End. And she has to stay there to ride out what's happening. Otherwise, she has no job. And she's also broke and she doesn't want to go back and live with her dad because he's literally hasn't spoken to her since her mother passed.
Hmm.
So she's stuck there too.
Right.
And then the house itself, which we talked about a little bit, is gothic, haunting. It's claustrophobic. The floors are slanted. It's dark, it's cold, and it also symbolizes the secrets that are hidden within it.
Hmm. Let's even talk about the name of the estate, Hope's End. So the last name of the people are Hope, right? And is literally the end of the street. So, it's
Right.
end of street Hope, but really you get the idea like there is no hope here. Like no hope
No.
at all. So even just the title is isolating
Mhm,
of the place,
mhm.
which, Winston, you fucking moron. Like what who named their place that? Obviously Riley Sager did it to
An idiot. Yeah.
fully create this really just horrific place. But like me
Mhm.
thinking, like, that actually checks out. He's that much of an arrogant ass that he would name something Hope's End. Like, it's ironic.
Mm,
Not for you.
way to go.
All
Yeah. Well,
right.
he didn't live past 1929, so it didn't work out for him.
No, it did not. Then we get into identity and self deception. So, the identity switch or twist with our main characters is major exploration on how people kind of reinvent themselves for protection, manipulation, how people use identity for their own gains. Both Kit and Lenora, they essentially redefine who they are, because they have to, based on the perception of the public. So they have to have this idea of, I don't have to be who everyone says I am. I'm not a murderer, and I can live my life how I want to. And then also it goes into how far someone will go to bury themselves or reclaim parts of themselves, or, change who they are. Literally, we can go to the brink of to change ourselves.
Yeah. And we also have guilt and redemption as big elements here. Kit, of course, carries this guilt of her mother's basically seemingly assisted death and is looking for a second chance redemption for herself. Lenora herself is haunted, and even the house themselves, everyone who works and lives in it, are like defined by the storyline and this guilt surrounding what's kind of going on with the past actions and what the house stands for in terms of surviving this tragedy. And the characters try to kind of redeem themselves to a certain point, but Sager still doesn't fully tie the bow on redemption being truly possible, which I also enjoyed. There's gray in this story, and I really enjoyed that piece as well.
Right. And then legacy and family secrets. Obviously, the whole family has secrets, and that they're haunting them. Now let's jump into the plot. So the way the plot is structured is in different sections. So we're going to start with introduction to the conflict. So basically, the first third of the book, you're getting introduced to a lot of different characters, a lot of different tension. So very first part, we are introduced to Kit and tension with Mr. Gerland, her employer. Kit was placed on suspicion due to an incident Kit had with her previous patient. So immediately we know there was a death, but we don't know it's her mom yet. We just know there was a death. She was the patient was in the care of her, and it was essentially negligence.
Something didn't go well.
Right. And she admits it, at first, this is very clear what I did. She's very outright that she accidentally left a bottle, which she wasn't technically outright because she didn't accidentally leave the bottle, but we'll get into that later.
No.
So Mr. Gerland, has punishment, assigns Kit to Hope's End to be the caretaker of Lenora Hope. So she's hesitant because she has this local legend in this town where Lenora murdered her whole family. And the legend goes, at 17, Lenora Hope hung her sister with a rope, stabbed her father with a knife, took her mother's happy life. It wasn't me, Lenora said, but she's the only one not dead. I thought it's so interesting because, so there are some key details here that are correct, right? The sister was hung, the father was stabbed, and the mother died.
Yes.
But Lenora wasn't the one responsible for either of those three. And that's what you kind of find out throughout the story, that the legend isn't true.
It's true.
But there are aspects of it, that were true. And I feel like that's a big role here.
Well, she's the only one not dead is not true, but the rest of it is true.
Yeah, because she said it wasn't me. It wasn't her. Shaggy.
No.
So that was the legend. And that's Kit ultimately plays this legend multiple times in the back of her mind as she's taking care of Lenora.
Yeah, because she's grown up with it. So it's...
Anytime she sees her,
she's grown up believing this. She's lived in this small town. Yeah. So it's permanently in her brain. It's also permanently in our brains as readers, but it's also her crutch. It's also something that limits her from seeing truth because she already has an assumption about what's going on in this house. So that allows her to not have a clearer picture than someone who wouldn't have grown up in the town and just goes there to become a caretaker. There's a difference that makes that key for her and why she has trouble kind of piecing things together. And I think her assumptions only impede her ability to do that. And I like how Riley Sager identifies that assumptions are ultimately in the way of seeking truth because it doesn't allow you to have this clear picture that you should have because your assumptions blind you to the reality of what's happening. And they can ultimately get in the way of discovering the truth. I enjoyed that piece of this book. Right. So when she arrives, and we'll kind of go quickly through this to get the basics of the plot. She first gets there and she sees that the Hope mansion has literally, started to fall apart. And She gets kind of the tour. She meets Mrs. Baker. She's given the parameters of her assignment, and that Lenora, Miss Hope, she's a caregiver of her, and she needs round the clock care, right? Because she's paralyzed. She can only move her hand. She can't speak. She only can move her left hand. So she drops her belongings off at the room, and she feels this constant tension with how is she going to approach this. She's like, I feel scared. I don't know why I feel scared. She feels cold in the house. There's a bunch of different things that she's trying to figure out. And she starts getting introduced to the fact that Lenora can communicate a little bit more than she's let on, especially when it's just her and Lenora. And she figures out that she likes to type on this typewriter. And so she starts pointing to the typewriter and realizes that she can communicate more. And she types out basically the first chapter of her book, of her story. She tells Kit, I want to tell you, I want you to know my whole story, and I'm going to tell you my whole story. And the first thing she tells her about is sitting for a portrait that Peter Ward is painting this portrait of her. And we're introduced to her perspective in 1929 of her life at Hope's End, and that her father cares only about money, prestige, and perception of happiness, but not actually about happiness. And she felt confined even then to Hope's End, and she hated it. She hated living there.
I mean, that game that he played with them, he would literally lock them in their rooms and be like, first one to scream loses. It's like, what the kind of game is that? And all the doors in the entire mansion are locked from the outside.
Locked from the front.
You don't.
Yeah, from the outside. Mm-hmm.
That's so.
Why did you do that?
Right.
It's a bizarre
only
thing
to confine someone in there. That's literally the only reason, unless a locksmith just fucked up the entire thing, which I doubt it. He's just a messed up man.
Yeah. Winston's just got serious issues, so no. So there's definitely some abuse happening there with the father, for sure. Even at the beginning, we kind of get that identified. And then present day, Kit discovers the love of typing, of storytelling. She's a very good storyteller, very good writer, and this becomes their way that they communicate. They have a nightly routine where they communicate this way. So they have the tapping that she does, but also through typing. And people believe that Lenora killed her mother. So she's like, look, I know you're going to care for me. You have nothing to be afraid of with me. Let me tell you my story. We have this moment where it's Lenora's birthday dinner. This is one of the flashbacks that are included. Her father's flirting with a new maid, and he has a wandering eye for sure. Her mother stays in the room. She's addicted to laudanum, which I think that's how you pronounce that, but that's how I'm pronouncing it.
It's basically an opiate.
Yeah. And it's an old school painkiller that's highly addictive. They no longer use this for this reason. And she's addicted to painkillers, and all she does is basically self-medicate. So her mother stays a lot of time in her room, and she gives her a globe of the Eiffel Tower from A Happier Time. And it's like, you need to go see the world. Don't get stuck here like me. Go see the world. And her mother's like very supportive of her, like getting out and going to Europe and going and doing other things.
Winches.
Now we bounce back to we bounce back to present day, and there's a lot of jumping around. So Jessie ends up she gives her the murder tour. So now Kit is getting the murder tour of where the murders happen. She shows her like, hey, when you came into the house, by the way, did you see that giant blood stain? And she didn't realize it was a blood stain. So there's just all these, it was where Evangeline was murdered, where Winston is found on the billiard table. So we get our setup, like what I call our clue setup, which is basically Winston was killed with a knife in the billiard room. Evangeline was killed with the knife on the stairs. And Virginia was found hanging from a chandelier in the ballroom with the rope. So you have all the different weapons, how it happened, and there is no murder weapon that was ever found, even though multiple stab wounds were found on the victims. And then we try to get into more with Mary's disappearance, and it's believed she had a family emergency, and then Kit starts to think like, this is all too weird. Maybe she got spooked because she started digging into the story, and she just like dipped in the middle of the night. Like what else would she leave for if it wasn't an emergency, or she was like terrified in the middle of the night? And meanwhile, all this is going on in the evenings, and this is only like nights 1 through 3. I mean, there's not that many nights here that this happens.
This is night one. This is still night one.
Well, she's looking at the door, and she's like, there's a shadow. Like, how is
Mhm.
someone walking? Like, what the fuck? Like, I thought she couldn't walk. And so, like, there's just these really weird things going on in Lenora's room. She can't figure it out. She throws the door open and there's nothing. Lenora's passed out. Kit
Proceed.
returns to her room and she gets a call button from Lenora, and that Lenora had a nightmare. And she starts saying she wants to tell her the truth of the murder still to 1929. Her nightmare was likely tied to this flashback she shows her, which is Lenora catching her father having an affair with a worker. But I also think Lenora, and we know this later, is very, very calculated in the information that she
Oh, for sure.
gives to Kit. And it's all deliberate to try to set up the information of how she's going to tell this story. And it impacts ultimately Lenora's perception of love. And her father ends up finding her crying in the ballroom. And remember, she's a teenager at this time. She's 17 and tells her to keep a secret, not to upset her mother. Or we
It
perceive
would
that she's
kill
17.
her
To keep
mother.
a secret. Yeah.
Yeah.
That it would
Or the
kill her
words that
mother to find this out. Yeah.
the gaslighting. I cannot. So
Yeah,
after
yeah.
this point, basically all the introductions are done at this point. So we have the tension rising. So the house adds tension to Kit's feelings of hope's end. The home is on a tilt, which makes it disorienting to walk and sleep. Kit mentions multiple times she'll start on one side of the bed and like kind of finds herself shimmied to another side because the house is literally on a tilt. The nightmares of her
Yeah.
mother's final words constantly haunt her dreams. You know, it was just one more. I promise I'll only take one. So, like, all that's just haunting her all the time. She also hears footsteps in Lenora's room, but when she goes to investigate, there isn't anyone there. So, this is where we're kind of introduced first to either the skepticism of there's an actual haunting here, or maybe Lenora isn't being honest, or someone is sneaking around. So, there's a lot of like sketchy things going on here. So there's a lot of going through routine in the book just because she is a caretaker. You know, Lenora has a set routine that she's been doing for the past almost 60 years. And her handwriting, when she starts to type, I say handwriting, her writing, when she types, is actually very eloquent. Kit comments like, you're actually a very excellent storyteller. And Millie, Kit's like, wait, she's actually telling her confession here. Or so she thinks. So, and then due to the nature of the
Yeah.
house, Kit finds solace outside in the terrace because if you're constantly on a tilt, like that's so disorienting to your head. So she goes to get fresh air and she realizes like when you go outside, literally there's this railing that's not very high. Like it's not like up to your like torso or your chest. It's very, very low. So
No.
easy to fall over. And she sees down and then, you know, you'd just fall to your death basically at the end of the clip. And as she's like looking over and looking around, a voice like kind of spooks her, you know, calling out to her, "This is Carter." And she almost falls down to the falls over the railing, but catches herself. And this is where we're introduced to Carter, our current groundskeeper. And he takes Kit back to the house, which is a small cottage on property. He's the only person that doesn't live in the main house. So Kit learns Carter's background and he gives his own perspective of the murders. And this is where we're introduced to Ricardo Mayhew. So this is who, you know, kind of the thought that Riley Sager is trying to lead us down, that Ricardo Mayhew is one of the murderers here. And he was the previous groundskeeper. He was married. He was flirtatious. And on the night of the murder, all servants were given the night off, which is common every other Tuesday. They would just have a night off. They didn't have to be around, you know, go do whatever. And his wife went off and went to a movie, but Ricardo stayed behind and he ended up disappearing that night, never returning. So obviously suspicious events. And a Kit immediately after this, she like wakes up Lenora and is like, "You need to tell me about Ricardo Mayhew." And this is where we get our first flashback of Ricky, who that's what Lenora calls him, Ricky, not Ricardo. That's very important. I missed that in the first read because I was like, oh, that's a sweet nickname.
Yeah.
No. I mean, yes, but no, not wrong guy. Ricky meets Lenora in a very similar fashion that Carter meets Kit. So Lenora was out on the terrace getting fresh air after catching her father with a servant because, you know, that's life shattering. And she was sitting on the railing, which she was like kind of contemplating, like jump, no jump, you know, kind of teetering on the edge. And Ricky appeared and warned her to be careful. And she spoke about like how awful her life is. And he's just like, "You're some rich kid. Like your life isn't that bad." But she's like, "No, my life is horrible. I would literally kill to leave the mansion." And he's like, "Hi, I'm Ricky." We're introduced with his perception of the rich in the family is very skewed, and definitely his perception of her is very, like, I didn't get good, like, mushy, lovey-dovey feelings from him based on how he introduced himself at this point in time. So
Mm-mm.
Lenora, present now, Lenora typed the name Ricky on the top of the page and tells Kit that she has to go in order of events. And then Lenora writes out a chapter. She realized that it's a love story, and she fell in love 8 months before the murders happened with, which Kit believes, Ricardo Mayhew, but it's Ricky. So the house continues to spook Kit continually. She hears sounds in Lenora's room. She sees the shadows. She sees gray movement. It's just a constant thing that she's seeing and hearing. And she gets to the point where, like, I'm quitting this shit. I'm tired of being spooked because I am done with it. Because she goes and confronts Lenora, like, hey, is someone in here? And she says Virginia. And she's like, oh no, there's a fucking ghost in here. I can't do this shit. So she tries to get a reassignment from Mr. Gerlin. And he's just like, no. If you quit my employment and you don't have a job. So you either
He's such a
stay.
dick. Yeah.
He is. So he's like, you have to stay.
I mean, it's her mom. Like, what's wrong with you, bro? Like,
why would he kill her mom? Right.
Well, because he only gives a shit. He only gives a shit about his business name. He doesn't care about her. And it's so evident. It's like, what is wrong with you?
Absolutely.
It's ridiculous.
So, and he emphasizes that there are no other jobs for you. And obviously she's frustrated at this and just wants to go and cry, which I don't blame her because she's literally in a haunted house with murderers. And she goes on this terrace.
He's also a villain in my mind.
He is too. Yeah, absolutely. She's like, well, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to see what's cast in the shadows. So she like goes out and is trying to like look around, trying to like make some sense into it.
Yeah, like the next day or whatever.
Yeah. And she like looks over the railing and she sees the dead body of Mary Milton that fell to her death.
What the fuck?
Yes. So yes, panic attack here. And this is where Detective Vick comes in again. So he comes to question Kit about finding the body and her employment at Hope's End. And he believes Mary committed suicide based on a note found in her pocket. He doesn't tell what the note says. No. He just thinks it's a suicide note. And he is like asking Kit questions about how she feels about her job. And Kit's like, it's fine. He's like, yeah, well, you just lied to me because you just told your employer that you want to
and asked to be removed. Yeah.
Right. So then it goes into the Kit's unreliable to him.
She just keeps backing herself. Yeah. She keeps backing herself into a corner because he's also the investigator that investigated her about what happened with her mom.
Right. So he's biased.
He didn't believe her then. Oh, yeah. He's absolutely biased against Kit from the start. Yeah.
And he throws that in her face a lot of times, which gets her really frustrated. And she's like, well, if you don't believe me, then Lenora can tell you about the murders. And Lenora's, you know, if you walk into the room and see her, she's literally in a wheelchair and she can't move except her left hand. So Kit tells the detective Lenora can use the typewriter to speak. And Lenora's like, she just like flopped her hand there. Like she couldn't do anything. Yeah. And obviously this frustrates
the Vick. Unresponsive.
This frustrates Vick. And then this also
he gets even more pissed at.
Because he's like, you're wasting my time. And then Kit's frustrated, like, what the fuck was that? But Lenora's like, I literally have to keep this a secret from everyone. Which she's right. She's keeping this a secret for a long time. Another flashback of the love story between Lenora and Ricky. And it's literally the love story goes from the span of 2 weeks. Literally, night 4, she's given it to him. You know, there goes my flower.
They're hooking up.
Night 4. Yeah. And Ricky, we understand Ricky comes from a poor family. Obviously, he's a groundskeeper. But she loves him enough. And her sister, like, notices that, oh, you're in love with someone. It's probably Archie. And she's like, no, I'm going to continue to keep this secret. And then she ends this flashback. Well,
she laughed. Like, audibly laughs when her sister says, oh, you're in love with Archie.
Well,
and the
because
way I missed that the first time.
Right.
I was like, oh, it's because it's her best friend. That's why she laughed. No. That's not why she laughed.
No, I would say Lenora is in Archie's flavor that he partakes in. So the end of this flashback ends in this quote. It says, as long as hope still stands, my sister will remain. And I thought this is such foreshadowing to the
Oh, yeah.
ending, I actually loved this quote and how it ends that way.
Mhm.
That introduces really the love story and then kind of the spiraling of events that happens next in the flashback.
Right. So the staff at Hope's End is mourning loud the death of Mary because now they know this, and Jesse's like really upset by this because she feels partly responsible because she's like she felt off that day, and she's like just mourning in her room looking at pictures, and Kit is now even further determined to find out what happened to Mary, like why this happened. And she knows that Mary knew all these secrets. Kit asks Lenora about Mary. We already know that she gets confirmation that she knew everything. And she can't find any space where her writings were hidden. She's like, where is it? And then she realizes there's like an empty space on the carpet. Must have been where Mary's suitcase had to been, and that's where the story that she wrote had to have been. So the suitcase is what's missing. So she pieces this part together and she calls Detective Vick and she's like, look, Mary was pushed, and he's just like not buying it. And he's like, look, I had a suicide note from her that says, I'm sorry, I'm not the person you thought I was. And that's all it says. So we don't get any other context about the note. It's just like confirmation in his mind that it was a suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Vic then emphasizes that he also knew Lenora and he worked at Hope's End in 1929. And the case gets cold. And that's kind of all that happened with it because they couldn't figure out what happened. They didn't have a weapon, etc. And now she's like firmly believes that somebody in the house is the murderer and wants to keep the secrets. And that's why this is happening. So Carter walks up to behind Kit and heard this whole conversation and invites her back to the cottage. And she's like, very like, what the fuck? I was just
No.
talking to a detective. Now you want to invite me back to your cottage? And no. And then Carter shows Kit a photograph, though, that he found. And it was a photograph of Lenora, and she's pregnant, like super pregnant.
Very pregnant.
And the date was September 1929, which is a month before these murders happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we find out in a flashback that Lenora finds out she was pregnant. She's waiting to tell Ricky, and when she does, he's happy. And so for 5 months of this, Lenora is super happy. Then in September, on a Tuesday, the servants are gone. Ricky sleeps in Lenora's room. They sleep together. They speak about finances, which Ricky gets upset. And he's like, don't worry, we'll figure this out.
He's very prideful because he doesn't have money.
Yeah,
And then
right.
if a man can't provide, it's like the stereotypical, like, if a man can't provide for his family, what is he doing type thing, which is obviously like, iconic of that, or clear of that age, but not valid.
Right. Yep. So then this is Carter telling this story, right? Carter's grandfather was left on the steps of a church on Christmas morning in 1929. So he's thinking, do the math. This could be me. I could be related. I could be the grandson of Lenora by this math. And Mary was helping me to investigate this. She took blood from me and and from Lenora and went to go get it tested. And then she died. Like he never saw her again. Carter believes Mary was murdered because he's related to Lenora and somebody wants to keep a secret to protect the family somehow. This is the first time that we get a landslide effect of what's happening to this house. As this story's starting to crack open of what's happening here, we get the first fissure, quite literally, of the house where it's starting to crumble and the cliffside is starting to fall. Kit then confronts Lenora about her pregnancy, and then she just says that the baby's gone. No other details. That she doesn't know anything about the baby. The baby's gone. And
which is true.
Lenora at that point no longer wants to speak. Correct. This is true. And it's really sad what happens. And yeah, Archie comes in to speak to Lenora, and then Kit puts on headphones for her and they talk about the past. He states he was close to Lenora, but wasn't close to Virginia, asks about the babies, and he says he doesn't know anything about the fact that she was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also like, stop asking.
All lies.
Like, there's no reason. Yeah.
Right. And the headphones are really important too because she's listening to audiobooks that Jesse reads to her. And so I thought that was like kind of fun, like little insert of Jesse, because we don't see a lot of Jesse. She's a side character. So she would just, because she can't read books, she would just read the books on cassette, and then she would put the headphones on into her Walkman.
Yeah.
So then we get the flashback to Lenora speaking about the baby with Archie. And you find out Archie, through this flashback, you find out Archie just lied. Archie was friends
Oh, yeah.
with her and knew about the baby 100%. So said he was happy for Lenora, but was also concerned because he understood the social ramifications of having a child out of wedlock during that time period. I mean, look at her mother. And he talks about knowing a doctor who can help her terminate the pregnancy because her father has been impregnating multiple maids who have had to go through a similar experience, unfortunately. So there's a lot of talk around the mansion about and that sort of thing. So Lenora is hopeful about her life with Ricky, though. And this is where we get the picture. Archie takes a picture. He saved up for like this camera and takes a picture of her and tells her, if he or anyone ever hurts you or makes you unhappy, I won't hesitate to kill them. So this introduces, or Riley Sager introduces, maybe this could be a killer. So he's like putting all these like with just the vocabulary, I will kill them. So he could potentially be a killer here because he was there in 1929 when the murders happened. And then to the present, after Archie leaves the room, Kit speaks to Carter about the house and the murders. And this is where Kit discovers the Walkman, which she placed in Lenora's right hand. So we've talked about how she's paralyzed except she can move her left hand. However, the right hand, or the Walkman, was switched off. And Kit is like, wait a minute, did I do that? Could you accidentally do that? So she's like in her room, like trying to like slam the Walkman against like her hand, against anything to try to get it to like stop or switch off. But there's like literally no explanation. So she's like, all right, well, Lenora's lying to me now. She switched it off. That is the only way that this could happen. So, and then we have noise outside, kids snooping around. This is where we get Kenny back again into the story. And because him and a bunch of other guys are drunk and they're shouting that she's a killer bitch. And then Kit like literally
he's an idiot.
Takes off and tackles them. I'm like,
yeah,
what? But, you know, I mean, I'm 31 too, and I'm not chasing no 20-year-olds down the street. Like, what are you doing? So she tackles him, and this is the guy she's been sleeping with for the last 6 months before getting her job at Hope's End. And he's just immature, and he reminds her that people aren't always as they seem, and what the rumors say about them aren't true. Because he's like, people told me you were a murderer, but I didn't see that. So, you know, you gotta dig deeper and look past what people are saying. And then we have, I do like the pacing of this book because even though like there's a lot of time jumps and stuff, but like a whole chapter isn't even like one day or one time period. There's a lot of quick pacing here. So the next morning, Kit wakes up and goes into Lenora's room, and on the typewriter, it says, "It's all your fault," like repeatedly multiple times. And Kit immediately is like, "Family meeting, who the fuck did this?" And no one confesses to typing the page. You know, they're like, "You're kind of crazy. You're going up on about these ghosts." And Mrs. Baker's like,
right.
"Why didn't you tell me before?" And Kit's like, "I tried to, and you told me to like relax. It's just the house." And Miss Baker's like, "Okay, well, if Virginia is brought up again, then I need to know about it." Like she like kind of gets spooked, which is like, okay, Virginia's setting you off for a reason. And then this is where we get Kit testing her theory that Lenora can actually move and has been faking her injury. So she's in her right hand, she starts like dropping objects into it. First, she starts off with something light, and she's hoping for like to trigger a reflex here. And she realizes, I need to drop something a little bit more personal, a little bit more fragile, valuable, that you want. So she takes that snow globe that her mother gave her on her birthday and drops it into her hand. And Lenora doesn't catch it, and it just shatters on the ground. And then Lenora's just like her eyes like narrow, like, "You bitch." Like she's not gonna risk it to catch that, but obviously she's pissed. And then after this, Lenora's like, "Nope, I'm not interacting with you. You're not getting no knocks. You're not getting any texts. Nothing from me."
Nothing. Yep.
Nope.
She cuts her off. So then we have another flashback. Lenora and Virginia are eavesdropping on an argument that their parents are having, and they're yelling about money. And this is where we find out about Winston not being trusted with the girl's inheritance, and that we find out that Lenora isn't Winston's child. And this is the revelation that her mother was pregnant with another man's child, and that they couldn't actually be wed. And this is a revelation because they first realized, yeah, they never resembled each other, but like they didn't piece it together. And her sister is really rude to her and is like, oh, well, you should be relieved because you're not the only slut in the family. Like, look what mom did and like, look how you were brought into the world. And so Lenora ends up going to her mother and asking for the
Well,
truth, and Evangeline confesses all of this information.
at least that's what you're supposed to think.
Mm-hmm.
That's what mom did, and that's how you were brought into the world. That's how you're supposed to think when you read this.
Yeah.
And then the plot twist kind of changes that perspective. But I like how because she doesn't say that. She doesn't say that directly. She calls her a slut, but you infer a
Yeah.
lot of what Lenora's feelings are, and I do love that
Yeah.
about this author.
Mm-hmm. So she's like, well, look, Kit in the present tense, we're jumping back, is like, okay, Lenora, you don't want to talk to me. I get it. Let's make a deal. I will take you outside. Do you want to go outside? Because Mrs. Baker's rule is you can't go outside. And the deal is you have to tell the rest of your story to me if I take you outside.
Mhm.
So Mary Milton has her funeral and Kit takes Lenora outside. And this is one of the moments where I was like, what the fuck, Kit? Because she takes Lenora outside for like the first time in decades. And so they end up falling asleep
Yeah.
outside in the grass. And she starts to ask Lenora some questions before this happened. She's like, the baby was a boy. Mary did draw blood from her arm. And she's like, I don't think I'm going to tell you the truth. So Kit gets pissed off and she runs upstairs to get this typewriter. But meanwhile, she'd taken a nap. So they're at this funeral. And I'm like, what the fuck, girl? They're going to
How
come
long
back
is
from
it?
the funeral.
Yeah.
How long is this funeral?
Mhm.
And I remember texting that to you and being like, what is going on? And so then she gets caught, of course.
Duh.
And Miss Baker shakes the typewriter and throws it over the cliff. Awesome.
We have another flashback, and this flashback takes place right after the last flashback where Lenora realizes that she is not her father's daughter. So she goes into the room, and her mom is like unresponsive ultimately. And she realizes she would have died if she didn't come back into the room. The doctor and instead of like Dr. Walden, he's stupid. Instead of like, let's get her off these drugs because is clearly taking too much. We're just going to just prescribe her smaller doses. But she still has the whole bottle, so she can down whatever she wants, but whatever. And then by the end of September, her pregnancy was showing more and more. And she's like, I got to come up with a plan. I can't keep hiding this. Her clothes have to be like sewn, like taken out a couple of inches. Her dad's starting to notice and puts her on like this crazy diet because girls should have a girlish figure, even though it's commented that he's kind of a little bit on the more indulgent side. But she needs to eat more because she's hungry all the time. And she needs a doctor because she's 5 months pregnant and hasn't seen anyone, but obviously she doesn't trust Dr. Walden. So she realizes the only person that she can probably trust is the mistress. That is it.
Yeah.
I can trust the mistress.
She has a secret on her.
So she sets up like this plan to like try to catch the mistress, and then she thinking it's like some random maid, and she realizes it's Miss Baker. Miss Baker is the mistress.
The etiquette teacher.
Yeah, the etiquette teacher is sleeping with her father. Like the irony in that. Great.
Yeah.
And then Kit, so now we go into the present again. Kit confronts Miss Baker in the dining room because she burned all the pages Lenora wrote. And Miss Baker's like, they're mine to burn. Like, that's not your story. I'm protecting Lenora. So you're going to have to be okay with this. And she also confirms that she knew Kit was accused of killing her mother. She found that out, and she realized that her and Lenora would probably be a good fit because of that character flaw, I guess, that you can see in both of them. And she's also saying that Lenora is manipulative, and that's probably why Mary committed suicide. Lenora made her feel wanted, and then she like disregarded her. And all of this conversation is basically to build Miss Baker into a murderer, ultimately in Kit's mind, because Miss Baker, if something happens to Lenora, she gets everything. She gets the whole estate. So Kit in her mind is like, well, she clearly killed Mary, and I'm sitting here with a murderer. And
exactly.
Then we get another flashback after that.
And there's a flashback to Miss Baker is being paid to have sex with Mr. Winston. And Lenora now wants her help. And she says, all right, well, if you don't help me, I'm going to tell Bernice Mayhew, which is the gardener's wife, who's going to tell everyone, and your reputation is basically done. You won't be able to get a job anywhere.
Mhm.
And so she's like, fuck, okay, I agree. At this point now, we jump back to present day with Kit, and she runs up to Miss Baker's room and is like, figures out she waits until she has an opportunity. And then she runs up to Miss Baker's room and snoops around. And she's trying to find evidence. And then she realizes that there's $1,000 going to a resident bill, basically, at Ocean View Retirement Home. And she's like, why the fuck is there, who is alive that the house is paying to have in a retirement home?
Mhm.
And Miss Baker comes into the room at this point. And so Kit hides in this armoire, and this is where the white wine is featured because you know that Miss Baker's just been drinking. She's kind of a lush. And she's drinking her wine, and then the house begins to shake. So she almost gets caught. Kit almost gets caught right here. And this is where in the writing, not only you have all this other suspense, like every other chapter, there's some like very suspenseful element. And this was another one where she like almost gets caught by Miss Baker. And she's kind of saved by the bell in this point, which is the crack that's running through the house. So there's a crack running now through this terrace, and that's where we end that piece. Kit suddenly gets this idea because now we don't have the typewriter to use this Ouija board that Jesse brought out whenever they did the murder tour, which was a very brief part of the story. And she starts to ask Lenora about Bernice Mayhew. And she's like, that was a nasty woman. And she knows about that night. And that's why there's money that's being sent to her every month.
And then we have another flashback to Lenora. It's now October. She is now laying around in bed to avoid showing her pregnancy. She's pretending she's like depressed or kind of like her mother in a way, just so she doesn't have to move because she doesn't look pregnant if blankets are pulled up over her. And but she wants to see Ricky because she hasn't seen him. And she convinces Miss Baker to tell him to meet her. And as Lenora is tiptoeing down the stairs, she runs into Bernice Mayhew, who catches her and sees her pregnant. And she's like, I knew it. You're just like your mother. And she believes Lenora has been sleeping with Ricardo, her husband. And that's because Ricardo has been sneaking off for sure. But remember, she is sneaking off to meet Ricky. So she ultimately blackmails Lenora and her family for $50,000 to keep her mouth shut. And she tells Ricky the situation, and they decide that we're going to run away, and we're going to run away tomorrow night. And that leads into tomorrow night, obviously being the night of the murders. So it starts from there. And then, so that's where we're introduced to Bernice as like a flashback. We get her character. And then now we're present day. We actually see Bernice Mayhew. Kate goes to Ocean View Retirement to question her. She lied to the staff to get in, talking about how she's like a nurse from the insurance company. And Bernice confirms that she was present the night of the murder. She saw Lenora with a knife and a bloody nightgown. That's all she saw. Like, she didn't see the murder, but she saw enough. Enough to probably incriminate Lenora. So there was screaming, and Lenora told her to just get out, which she did. She says she felt bad for Virginia because she knew she was in such a state, which is another hint that I didn't catch the first time around. She believes Ricardo fell for Lenora's big blue eyes. So this is where we're getting introduced to the twist. She left the mansion and knew Ricardo also left and probably killed the parents and fled because she never saw him again. He's just gone. And Archie later gave Bernice an envelope with $1,000, and Bernice said there needs to be a similar payment every single month. And that's like hush money. And that's how she gets the $1,000 every month now, almost 60 years later. Like, that's a ton of money that she got, more than $50,000. And then
way more.
Detective Kit ultimately interrupts their conversation and escorts Kit off the premise for trespassing.
Now let's get into the twist, because this is where this shit just hits the fan, because you're waiting for it and you're waiting for it. And this isn't a long book, but you're still like, okay, how did we, like, what the fuck? You know, like, what's going on? Who did these murders? What's happening? We have these portraits. Kate comes back to Hope's End. She's looking at these portraits. There's 4 of them. There's 3 that are covered. So I was like, we're going to get a reveal of these portraits at some point, because we have our author who identifies that there's 3 that are covered. Like, we're going to have to see what's underneath these at some point. So she looks at the portraits in the hallway, and she takes the black silk off the portraits, and she realizes that Lenora Hope had blue eyes and Virginia Hope has green eyes. And Kit then checks the urns to see that one is empty. So we flash back, and the eye color is important because remember what Bernice just said. So Kit checks the urns and sees that one is completely empty. Flashback to the night Lenora wanted to leave. So now we're at the night of the murders. And her sister comes in to see what she's doing. Lenora said she's leaving. Her sister locks her in her room to save the family from embarrassment. Wonderful. Kit confronts Miss Baker. Now we jump to the present day. Kit is confronting Miss Baker about being Lenora. Miss Baker was very outright with this story because she pieces together that's Lenora. And she goes, Miss Baker becomes very outright with the story. And she explains everything she saw that night. She found her mother dead, went to call the police. Then she went to find Virginia, who had hung herself in the ballroom. And she goes out into the terrace and is just like screaming bloody murder at this point. The police arrive and they find Virginia is still alive. She's responsive, but she can't speak because the hanging damaged her larynx and snapped her spinal cord. And you have to remember, too, that Virginia at this time, who was Lenora, there's a switch here. We now find out that Miss Baker is Lenora, and Virginia, who's in the wheelchair, was acting as Lenora this whole time. It's important to note that Virginia, as she was pregnant, was already acting as if she was unresponsive. She was already kind of practicing this for a time before this occurs. So the police are suspicious now of Lenora, the real Lenora, and all of her friends left her. They all abandoned her at this point. So she ultimately bribes Dr. Walden with a vehicle of her father's and says, you need to declare Virginia that she's dead because she really can't do anything anyway. She's not going to know. And like, you need to just do this. So he does. He declares her dead. And she has Virginia take her identity as Lenora. Lenora ends up becoming Miss Baker. She leaves ultimately for 2 years. At first, she tried to tell people the truth, and then she just changed her identity completely. She flees to Europe. She starts a new life for a couple of years, and she returns just before World War II. She confirms that Virginia was not pregnant when she hung herself, and Lenora actually removed the chair so it wouldn't look like she committed suicide for losing the child and murdering her parents, which she doesn't blame her for doing. So Lenora thinks that Virginia murdered her parents too.
Right. So Lenora doesn't even know the truth of what happened that night because, and she even states that, like, I'm going to tell you only what I know. And that's still limited because I didn't see everything.
Right. So we jump back in time to now Virginia Lenora, but Virginia, who we now know as Virginia, is giving birth to her son. They force her to give birth on the floor of her room.
I can't even imagine.
It's horrific.
These next two flashbacks, I'm like, I can't.
Awful. Her sister and Miss Baker the real Miss Baker, help deliver the child. And her father tells Lenora to not give Virginia her child, or he's going to kill the baby.
Toss it right over the edge. I'm like, holy
literally
shit.
Right there.
Literally,
I'm like, what the fuck?
Heartless. Yeah. Heartless. And Miss Baker's like...
Because he doesn't want his reputation tarnished.
No, how dare anyone think less of him. And then Miss Baker's like, it's okay. Like, Virginia's like crying. Like, please, no, don't do this to me. Like, her heart's like literally shattering in two. And Miss Baker's like, I'm going to come up with a plan. I'm going to figure it out. But then Virginia, she passes out and she never sees her kid again. But we don't get that side of the story because from Virginia's flashback, she doesn't know what the plan was because she wasn't conscious for it.
Right. So Lenora tells Kit Miss Baker's plan, and she starts packing her things to leave with the baby. And she planned on returning with the baby, but after everything that happened, because she finds out ultimately, of course, because in all the papers with the murders, she ends up keeping the baby, and she flees to Canada and raises him as her own. Kit is originally outraged by this decision, but then Lenora is like, no, this was ultimately what was best for him. She's in a wheelchair.
She can't move. Yeah, she can't move at all.
Right.
So that wouldn't have been a life for the kid, which is fair.
The kid, yeah.
Virginia, I feel like
from what
Virginia
she knows.
Right. If Virginia would have known,
For
she
what
probably
Lenora
went like,
knows,
I can move, it's fine, but no,
Yeah.
we're not doing that.
Mhm.
Archie then, like, because Archie walks up behind them as they're having this conversation, and he confirms that he was actually the one having the affair with Ricardo Mayhew, not Virginia. This is
Right.
why he was present during the murders, and he also believes Virginia committed the murders as well. So no one actually saw the murders happen besides Virginia,
Right.
and now we know that Ricky is
Mhm.
not Ricardo. Those are two different people.
Right.
So
2 different people.
Virginia and Ricky are the ones. And then we have a flashback to the murders. Virginia gets the strength to move. She becomes conscious. She grabs the knife that was used to cut the umbilical cord and immediately goes to her father's study, ready to just kill him. And then that flashback is broken up to present day. Kit's in shock. She calls her dad.
The way this drags out was so fucking
it was
good to read. Oh,
It was good.
I loved this. Because then you're like, oh, she's going to fucking kill her dad. Like, she's got the knife.
Mhm.
She just had to had this horrific childbirth. Like, she's a teenager trying to go do, like, it's just like so much. You're just like, okay, we're finally going to know what happens here.
Right.
And then you don't. You
No.
do not.
Well, Kit calls her dad and said she wanted to come home, and she like gets her shit, and not even gets her shit, she leaves her shit, and she's going out and going to drive home, and Carter stops her and he gets in the car, and as they're driving to town, they're like talking about what Kit just learned, and Kit ends up like starting to believe that Carter's the one that killed Mary for knowing the results of the blood analysis, because she pieces together that Mary made it back knowing what the blood test was. So she's like, you killed her because you found out you weren't related to the grandmother.
And now you're not getting this big inheritance. Yeah.
So she kicks him out and drove to her house. And as soon as she gets to her house, her dad's not there. The way this scene, I was like, why is her dad not there? What happened? And instead, she finds the suitcase with the blood samples and with the entire typed story that Virginia typed to Mary that whole time. And then she realizes that her father, Patrick, is actually Ricky. That plot twist, I was like, I'm sorry. What?
Yeah.
That's how, what?
Her dad.
Her own
Kit's dad is Ricky. What? I wasn't ready.
I wasn't either. That was like, that caught me to the side. And then we get a flashback to the murder again. Ricky, her lover, and Kit's dad, now we know in this story, was speaking to Winston. So Winston's like, I will pay you to leave and keep the baby. And because Ricky never had money, he's like, okay, and goes along with it. And Virginia's like, no, you're lying. No, I'm not going to do that. And she goes to like lunge at her father and at both of them, but mainly at her father, and her mother catches her wrist. And the way her mother's described is like she has never been more clear in her entire life. The clarity she has on her face. And Evangeline takes the knife from her daughter and kills Winston.
Yeah, because she's overhearing all this. So Evangeline hears, because she didn't know, right?
No,
Evangeline,
of course not.
Well, she knew part of it, but she didn't know like the full what happened. And then Evangeline wasn't present when the baby was born or anything like that. So she doesn't have the full story. So she overhears it all and walks in right at this critical moment and takes the knife from her daughter. And Ricky takes Virginia out of the room to her room. And Evangeline comes up to the stairs with a stab wound. And she starts heckling Ricky about not being a man. And is like, finish the job, finish the job. And the way that this was deliberate by Evangeline, what were your thoughts on that?
Because Evangeline obviously has hated Winston, like her entire marriage.
Yeah.
And
of course,
love that she took that burden off of Virginia, because she knew Virginia was going to kill him. And she wanted to kill him too. But she's like, I'm not going to, my daughter has already experienced enough. And I have been so broken based on, she was able to keep her baby, but she wasn't able to experience her true love. And she just takes that burden off of her. And it almost feels like in her broken heart, that was a complete act for her. And she's like, done. She's like, okay, I protected my daughter from this.
So what about her heckling Ricky?
Oh, yeah. She was intentionally like, she wanted him to die. She wanted to die. She's wanted to die for a long time. That's why she's been trying to
I also think she...
OD.
Yeah. But I think she also wanted to reveal to Virginia who Ricky was even more
Mm-hmm.
than he already had revealed, which is that he would take the money and kind of run. It
His
went deeper
pride.
than that because all
Mm-hmm.
it took was Evangeline poking a little bit more at that and saying, come on, like, you're not a real man. Like, you can't actually, get up here and finish the job. Like, heckling him.
Mm-hmm.
And he does. He ends up stabbing her. And then Virginia's like so overwhelmed by this entire thing that she throws the knife into the ocean and goes and runs and grabs a rope because, of course, Ricky like pieces out at this point
Mm-hmm.
and goes to lay low and thinks whatever he thinks after the fact. And Virginia gets a rope and intends to hang herself. And
I mean,
so
like,
at the end of it, Ricky thinks that she's dead too and that everything is like he's good,
mm-hmm.
basically.
And like, I don't blame her, honestly. I mean, she's 17 and she felt so alone in that house.
It's too
And
much.
she was so excited
Yeah.
to have a baby because she's like, this baby loves me. I don't feel any love in this home. And to have that, like, I
And
can't
Ricky
even
loves me.
imagine. And Ricky loves me. And then she finds out, like that's
Or
not
she has to
actually
give
true.
birth.
Yeah. Traumatic.
Well, not only that,
Giving
but
birth
the
is traumatic as
birth,
is. But
your
like,
whole body, psychologically, you're not okay from that experience anyway.
No.
Like, there's no way you're like in your right mind. She literally just gave birth. Like, she's
Right.
not okay.
And
then on top of that, her baby gets ripped from her. Yes,
Mhm.
it's a preemie. Her baby gets ripped from her. She's a minor. She's not fully developed in the mind.
Mhm.
And, she's seeing her mother get. I mean, this whole thing is so crazy traumatic. There's just like, yeah.
There's a lot to
She just couldn't take it
unpack on this.
anymore.
No.
Oh yeah,
Of course not.
there's a lot of psychological trauma that's happening
Yeah.
right here. And she basically needed to chill out, which is exactly what she did after this happened. So then we jump back to present day. Kit has pieced this all together. That it's her dad is Patrick and the whole thing because she finds a suitcase, she reads the story, and now she knows who he is and she knows where he is. So she drives back to Hope's End and sees her father's car parked outside the gate. And she storms in and immediately goes to Virginia to try to save her and hide her because she's in the wheelchair. Ricky, her dad, comes into the room and almost apologized to her. And he says he did love Virginia and didn't mean ultimately to hurt her. He confesses to his daughter that he did kill Mary for knowing the truth, but Kit does not feel like her father would kill her. Kit tells her father, like, she knows the truth. Look, nobody else has to die here. I know what happened. And then he starts to strangle Virginia for telling the truth to Kit. Kit is pleading now for her father to stop. And Virginia ends up stabbing him with a corkscrew left by the bed. And the way I almost picked wine for this drink of the episode because of this corkscrew reference. But I was like, well, another time. But anyway, he gets stabbed with a corkscrew in the stomach. And then he admits to helping her mother commit suicide. So this is a plot twist that I didn't see that at all, where this whole time Kit has been living thinking that because she left the bottle out, that she basically assisted her mother in committing suicide by leaving this bottle out and having negligence and assisting, giving her one more pill and thinking that the one more pill that she knew her mom was going to take was the thing that ended up killing her. And that's not what happened. Her father drugged the shit out of her mom and she OD'd because of her dad. That's
they
exactly
agreed.
He says that it's
they
because she
agreed
was
to
in pain and we agreed that this is what we would do and I helped her take all these pills.
That one would be a hard way to go. Like ODing, your body like literally tries to reject that shit. You have to take so much, and I mean, it's heartbreaking seeing someone go through like that pain, but like making that choice and then letting your daughter live with that, knowing that she lived with that. He's like, I would have said the truth if you were convicted. It's like that only then when like jail's
You waited
on the line,
for that? Like,
what about her mental health? Come on. We don't care about that. The men in this book do not
Nope.
care about mental health besides Archie.
Or anyone else but themselves.
Yeah, very true.
Now we have the setting really taking place here where the Foundation is starting to literally slide into the ocean now. Kit and her dad save Virginia, but Lenora stays in the house because she's like, I just want to die here. I'm like, done. Her father ends up joining her inside Hope's End, and they both sat on the grand staircase until the home falls into the ocean. And that was pretty poetic
Was.
justice for sure, where the two of them, Lenora, who did this horrific thing to her sister, and the kid's father, who now has his wife gone and admits that he's a murderer to his daughter, can't live with this. And they both just sit on the grand staircase of this murder house, and the whole house slides off the cliff into the sea. Yeah. It was a lot to take in.
Yeah, it was a lot. And then we go into our resolution. So we skip a little bit in time. Kit becomes the primary caretaker of Virginia in her childhood home. So she now lives in her home. Virginia actually lives in like her old bedroom, where Kit lives in her parents' room. And Archie kind of helped them fix up the house so it's more accessible to Virginia because she still has the wheelchair. But Virginia is actually exposed to like modern technology, and she's so happy seeing the world, like seeing the TV for the first time. Like imagine, and like hearing music and like different types of music, and the new typewriter she has that's more electronic. Archie works as a chef close by and stops by every night to check in on them. Archie has very much just stayed a part of Virginia's life, since they were younger. For Ricardo, which we know was Archie's lover back in 1929, he does leave. He does ultimately just leave, and that's it for him. So the police reports that say that there's like no reference to where he disappeared to is very much accurate, but it wasn't for the same reason of what people thought, which was he was the murderer.
Yeah.
He was not involved in that.
No.
So that bow's all tied. Archie's storyline all tied up. Carter, he still works in town a little bit nearby. Kit keeps asking for his forgiveness, and he's like, fine, I forgive you. And it's not like true forgiveness. It's a stop leaving me alone, or stop like bothering me and just leave me alone type forgiveness. But she's like, that's fine. I kind of accused him of murder and ditched him in the middle of town.
Yeah.
So fair. And then we come to Kit just takes a shower, and she returns, and Virginia is literally gone, and only a note is left behind. And it's a little poem, which is really, also poetic, right? So at the very end, it says, at 69, Virginia Hope wrote her nurse this little note. Thank you, dear, for saving me. Now it's time to let you be. I take my leave, walking tall, knowing that I fooled them all. So again, she's not last plot twist, actually. She could walk this whole time. It was just all a ruse. And then we get this letter from Virginia months later. It doesn't really talk about like the exact timeline of what happened from when she took that shower to now. So it turns out Virginia has been faking being paralyzed this whole time. She was waiting for the right moment to use it against Lenora for literally taking away her freedom. All Virginia ever wanted to do was leave Hope's End, and Lenora took that away from her by locking her in her room, took her baby, took her identity, locked her in a room.
Everything.
So she was plotting. Hell hath no fury than a woman's scorn. Honestly, like this is just that. And another plot twist. Jessie was Virginia's granddaughter. That's how Jessie fit into the plot. And they communicated through the audiobook recordings, right? So Jessie would, in between chapters, would record like secret messages to Virginia. And that's how they developed a relationship. And they realized that she is her granddaughter. And Jessie told her about her son, which is named Marcel. And he passed away in 1982. The way like literally Virginia missed him by a year kind of breaks my heart ultimately.
Awful.
Like you just missed him. And then Jessie returned to Canada when Miss Baker died. The real Miss Baker actually died. And then Jessie devised a plan to escape. But it was put on pause because Mary died and then Kit came. And so it kind of put a wrench in things. However, when Virginia disappeared from the house, which is Kit's house, Jessie appeared in the window, like, knock, knock, let's go, bitch, and let's leave. And that's it. She got her fake passport with her real name on it that was stolen from her, and they fled to anywhere. And she bought tickets for Virginia and Archie to join them, hoping that they would forgive her. for like her deceit.
She was like, "Here's 2 tickets. You can come join me and decide if you wanna come out." Yeah.
And the very last page is a newspaper clipping that says that she died at 101 years old, which she lived a good life of freedom afterwards. I mean, obviously her life from 17
She was in her
to
70s.
74 was shit, but living from 72, 74 to 101, like that's she went out with a bang.
Yeah.
The media had a frenzy of this because they missed it the last time the whole murder happened. There wasn't a lot done on it because it happened on Black Tuesday, which is when the stock market crashed, and that's when the Great Depression began. So media
And that's
didn't
where
really
like
cover
a lot
it.
of questions weren't answered.
Right.
Yeah.
So here they obviously were very thorough. She appeared on talk shows to talk about how she had the biggest hopes of the century, and she just wanted to talk because, you know, she was mute for so long. Yeah. It was a happy ending
Crazy story.
for her.
What was your star rating for this?
I would say, honestly, I don't give thrillers 5s. Like, I've never given a thriller a 5.
I don't either.
Like,
No,
ever. Because usually I,
really
can
don't give thrillers
guess
5s.
something,
Mm-hmm.
but I was guessing this entire time. And this is my first book that I've ever read by Riley Sager. And I honestly will probably read many more.
Yeah.
So
I loved it. It was also my first book by Riley Sager and also a 5-star for me. And I don't give those out willy-nilly on thrillers. I feel like, to your point, like a lot of them can be really predictable. And sometimes that's like part of the genre is some of that predictability. But Riley Sager, just the way that he tied everything into a perfect bow and then some, even more than I anticipated, was very satisfying for me.
Right. I agree.
But now it's time to get into our mystery Q&A. These questions have not been shared with us, either of us, prior to asking. So I have a question for you. If you had the ability to go stay somewhere that's like truly, truly haunted, like Hope's End, would you stay there?
Okay, so fun fact about me, I like am obsessed with like ghost adventures, like that like really
I didn't know
tacky
this. Okay.
travel show that's like with Zach Bagans. Yeah, no, obsessed. I've watched every season multiple times. So, but what's really funny is I'm paranoid as shit. So like when I hear sounds in my house, I start freaking out. But I will watch Zach Bagans, and my husband's like, you know why you're paranoid, right? You watch this shit all the time and you listen to thriller stuff all the time and your murder mysteries and all that stuff. Like that's besides the point. So I would probably go stay, not to sleep, like not as something fun, but if I'm like staying up and like looking around, I would go to like the Lizzie Borden house because it's like historical too. Not like I feel like that's what Hope End is, right? It's like historical.
Yeah.
There's this crazy thing that happened. There's a lot of history that goes along with it. I don't want any demon ghosts, you know. I'll spray some holy water on me afterwards. But yeah, I would probably go there or like a haunted castle like in Europe. Europe has like a lot of castles. And I think that'd just be really cool to see like an abandoned castle. What about you?
Okay. So this question immediately makes me think of the old millennial MTV reference. But do you remember that show Fear on MTV back in the day, like early 2000s? Okay. It only ran for a couple of seasons, but like it was terrifying. They would give these 20-somethings an area of these really haunted, usually prisons or like areas that were like for mental health facilities and stuff like that, like old sanitariums that have been closed down and like and of course it had to be in the middle of the night, right?
Right.
So they would like link them with all
Ghosties
like a
have to
light in their
sleep
face
sometimes.
and like all this camera equipment, and they just had to like stand there in these areas, and it was terrifying. And so that's a no for me.
Yeah.
But castle that's converted to a hotel, or I actually stayed in a haunted place in Charleston that was converted into a hotel. So I don't mind that. Weird story. My grandmother told me this story about whenever we stayed there. She was like, the next morning was like, why were you tapping on my shoulder in the middle of the night? But I was not sleeping next to her.
Interesting.
So, but she said that it wasn't, she's like, she heard laughing. And so it used to be a boarding school, a military boarding school. And so she's like, I don't know what that was, and so, I don't know, she had some kind of an experience there, but it
Yeah.
wasn't negative. She didn't feel fearful at what had happened, but yeah, a little bit
I
wild.
Children
Yeah.
giggling, that's like the worst. Ghost children giggling, that's like no, absolutely not. Ghost children, period. No. I don't like The Shining. Don't nope. The twins in the hall. Nope. No, thank you.
Well, you have to think, like, when kids got sick way, way back in the day when they may have passed away on site. I mean, this type of stuff
Absolutely.
could have occurred.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I think like with those places, if I'm staying somewhere, I want to like obviously I said the Lizzie Borden house and like horrific things happened there because like that's just an iconic place. But like if I was actually going to stay
That's
at
a
a
no
place
for me.
overnight and like be at a place overnight and
Uh-huh.
like sleep there, I would need to know that no horrific deaths happen. Deaths, fine. Deaths happen all the time.
Yeah.
Nothing horrific, you know. That would
Yeah.
be the
Right.
line. Okay. So
Mhm.
my question to you, I guess it's around the same thriller-esque theme. So
Oh, boy.
we have Orlando. We have like a lot of like haunted house things, right? We have Halloween Horror Nights, Hallow
No, Halloween Horror
Scream.
Nights. Yeah.
And so best haunted house experience or worst, best or worst? Because worst could be
The
like
worst
you're
one
the
was
most
in a
scared.
mall.
Okay.
No, it was just, like, the
It was
production
just
quality
awful.
was very
Okay.
low, and it was a waste of money.
Okay. So
And
best.
then best, so I used to not love Halloween Horror Nights. That was, like, not for me for a really long time,
Really?
and I also
Okay.
still don't particularly love them, but my husband's one of his favorite holidays, and, like, he loves Halloween, and he loves haunted stuff. So,
Okay.
as a good spouse, I have started to overcome this fear and have joined him. So, the best experience I've ever had is actually Halloween Horror Nights RIP experience, which is very expensive, but I have now become bougie and feel like this is, like, the ultimate way to do Halloween Horror Nights. This basically is the way to skip all the lines essentially because 'cause you're
The
paying
lines
for
are the
that, and,
worst
like, the
part.
guide. Well, yeah, but it's not even really that. What's really cool to me is because I went to film school is, like, the guide actually tells you how they built the houses and, like, the story about how they built them, why they built them, what things to look for when you're going through the house,
Oh,
and
fun.
they ask you ahead of time if you want the spoilers or if or not. So, like, that way you don't have the house, like, ruined for you or whatever when you
Mhm.
go through, so you can have, like, a completely organic experience, or like me, who wants to know every single artistic cool thing that they did to the house before you go in it and all the information you could possibly have about it. I don't like people to touch me really at all. I'm not a hugger. That's not for me. I don't like
Mhm.
anyone sneaking up behind me. So for me, they're not my favorite. But I like the RIP experience because you don't have the anticipation of waiting super long. You get to experience all the houses. There's like your own bar. They take you to different bars where you kind of skip the line there too. And it's just a really cool experience where you get to experience all the houses, and then you have time left over because you're going so fast. You go to
Right.
all the houses, you have time left over, and then you can go like experience the rest of the park. So that to me was well worth the cost in my mind.
Okay.
Very, very expensive, but it was well worth the cost. So that's my
Okay.
best. What about you?
All right, fair. So we like Halloween Horror Nights. My husband, he doesn't get scared from things. Like jump scares don't freak him out. Like, because he's like, I can see that there's someone there. Like, I anticipate. He doesn't really get spooked. Why he likes going is because he likes watching my reaction to everything, which he thinks is
No.
freaking hilarious because I overreact to everything. I will know someone's there, but the fact that they jumped at me, I will scream at your face. So I am that person that gets targeted a
I'm always
lot.
afraid I'm going to hurt them. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm always afraid I'm going to hurt them.
I don't have a
Yeah.
fight. My reaction isn't fight or flight. Like my reaction's flight, not fight. So I like shrink and then I like run out of there. So last year it was really busy, but the Insidious house at the very end, one of the guys
Oh, wow.
accidentally touched me. He didn't mean to. He like went down and he didn't anticipate like me ducking a certain way. And then that's kind of freaked me out. I moved another way and this other guy came in and then I didn't see the guy coming like and these are all like the same demon guy started
Hmm.
coming forward and then I just lost my balance and I fell over and cuz like my husband's also like trying to like keep me in place cuz he doesn't want me to leave and I'm just like trying to bolt out of there cuz it's the very end. And then I basically like tripped and fell on my face and ran out there, which was fun.
Oh, no.
It was funny. I wasn't a bad sport about it. But another time because you know how
Did
they
they
have
like try to help you up, or like what
No, they were
happened?
still in character. They were still in character. I just got up and ran
Oh,
out there. Yeah. It's a
okay.
part of the
I
experience.
didn't
It's
know.
fine. It's fine. Another time, because you know how they have those scare zones? Well,
Yes.
clowns are like my least favorite thing. Like I hate clowns. It's
Okay.
that one area where there's transformers and it's like just there's nothing there except you get cornered. And one of these clowns chased me all the way down to the corner and just waited for me and sat there because they knew that I had nowhere else to go except to go back through the scare zone because I cornered myself. So that
Yeah.
was fun, just laughing at me and like banging the chainsaw on the ground. I was like, that's great. And so, yeah, wear comfortable sneakers
I'm their
if you
least
ever go.
favorite because I don't react.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what
I don't
Tyler
react
does.
in the scare zones
Yeah,
at
Tyler
all.
does it.
So
Yeah.
I'm like their least favorite. They like come to walk next to me and I'll be like, "Oh, did you want a beer?" Like I'll just talk to them. And they don't I'm like their least favorite person to be in
That's
next to.
funny. Yeah, no, I'm the opposite. I'm at the beginning of the night, towards the end of the night, I'm so numb to everything that I'm just like, okay, this isn't scary anymore. So, or I'll like
Yeah.
start
That's
walking
fair.
faster. My husband's like, can you slow down? I'm like, no,
And wait, you enjoy this? This is enjoyable?
I guess. I mean, it's fun ultimately because I know I'm not getting hurt.
Okay.
Like, I know I'm not actually like
That's fair. You're not actually there's not
in
real fear. It's just
danger.
like
Yeah.
excitement because of it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we wrap up, let's talk about what's coming up next in Book Club After Dark.
Michelle, I'm so excited. Next week, we're
Yes.
diving into our first dark romance, but like for me, is still a thriller too. So this is like a marriage of just our worlds combined to
Mhm.
give us Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne
Yes.
Weaver. If you haven't read this series,
Do it.
even if you're not a dark romance girly, I swear this is a very good series to dip a toe into that world, see if it's for you or not. Are there triggers? Absolutely. And we will cover all of them. There definitely are things in this that are graphic for sure. We're no stranger to those topics, so I feel like that's okay. But the Butcher and Blackbird series, Ruinous Loves trilogy, actually, by Brynne Weaver, is what we're getting into next. And I'm super, super excited about it.
Mhm.
So hit that subscribe button to hear more of our exciting book talk. And we're looking forward to dissecting this new series with you.
And don't forget, we want to hear from you. If you have thoughts on The Only One Left or suggestions for future reads, drop a comment below or message us on one of our social media platforms at Book Club After Dark Pod. Show us your fan art, theories, or anything bookish you'd like to share.
You can also visit our website, bookclubafterdark.co, to stay up to date on our cozy content. Check out our merch, like this hat right here that I'm wearing if you're watching us online. It's the hat that everyone's been talking about when they tag us in their merch that they receive. So thank you all for our previous guests tagging us. We love that and hope you enjoy some of the merch we sent you.
That's all for tonight. Sleep tight, night owls. Until next time, happy reading.